government fails, the world's off its rails, leaders are whacked, democracy is under attack. It's time to get smart, folks, time to get real. Let's cut through the crap, tell us how you feel. Let's pull back the curtain and open the door. Get some stuff that's not bought and paid for. Let's herd border to border, coast to coast. Let's cue the talent, let's meet the host. Podcast by George.
Hello, hi, how are you? And welcome back to another podcast by George. We've got a return visitor on the podcast. I'm delighted to have the time and be able to reach folks. Everybody's under this self-quarantine thing pretty much. People are hanging around the house, they're around home, and they're able to do these interviews, and it's great. Joining us today again, Todd Blodgett. And before we get to Todd, I just wanted to update maybe the news of the day. You're watching the reports come in about the coronavirus as it sweeps across the United States now, coming in from other parts of the world, just like everything does, basically, including viruses. And you can watch those counts, and by the time I get this up, my information would be outdated, so I'm not going to get into that too much. I did notice with interest that Wuhan province in China is not reporting any new outbreaks, which is interesting. They look like they've been able to control it over there, so that's reason for a little bit of hope. Other places, not so much, though. They're not having the news coming out of Europe and Italy in particular is very troublesome, so keep your eye on that. And you know, that's always subject for a future podcast by George. The other thing that I've been getting asked a lot about is Tulsi Gabbard exiting the presidential race and her support or endorsement of Joe Biden. And I think a lot of people kind of want to dig at me a little bit by asking me about that because they know I'm not a Biden supporter, most notably because of his support for the Iraq War. And they ask, you know, what about Tulsi doing that? Well, here's the thing. Tulsi Gabbard said from the moment that she got in the race, and she got in before Biden or most of the Democratic field that joined later, that she would support the Democratic candidate, the nominee. And I don't know that she ever envisioned that it would be Joe Biden, but it is. And she's a leader. She's the person that's looking at the landscape now and saying the voters have spoken. We all have decided. Not me, but the Democrats have decided that Joe Biden's their guy. The other part about it is, and again, she's a leader. This is a major, an active serving member of the military. She's looked at this and said, you know, we don't need to be standing in lines for primary voting with this virus infecting everyone. Joe Biden said, go vote. Tulsi Gabbard said, nah, Tulsi Gabbard's a candidate. She's ending her candidacy. She'd like to end the primaries. Joe Biden's the guy. Let's get on with it. And then finally, I would say the ultimate irony of all of this is Tulsi Gabbard was pilloried, for the last year or so for not being a good Democrat because she was calling out the DNC and she quit the DNC as its vice chair because of the cheating that was going on and the illegality revealed by WikiLeaks and all of that. And here she is, being the good Democrat and supporting the nominee. Elizabeth Warren didn't do that. I don't know if you noticed. Joe Biden was asked about it. If he weren't the nominee, would he support? He wasn't so sure about that. Bernie hasn't dropped out or supported anyone yet, although he did say, of course, that he would. It was the first words out of his mouth at his opening rally here in Des Moines, Iowa. So you know he's going to, but Tulsi beat him to the punch a little bit about that. So anyway, that might be subject for another podcast in its entirety. The only other thing I would say is, my God, since I've started doing this podcast, and Todd can relate to this, I've been following the news of the day, and particularly politics, more closely than I ever have before. Look at the articles that you may come across about Tulsi Gabbard suspending her nomination. Look at what the corporate media says about her and how they describe her candidacy and talk about her on a personal basis. It is shocking. It ain't like it used to be, folks. I'm telling you, this is somebody that's been running around the country, Tulsi that is, talking about the major issues of the day, and they insist on framing her on that Syria issue when she was over there with a peacekeeping force. Dennis Kucinich and some other people went over there and met with Assad and some other folks. Her Hindu religion. I just keep that in mind when you look at these things. Okay, my intros are always much longer than I thought they would be. But one of the things, yeah, I think they will be. One of the things that I've been recommending to folks is this is a good time to read a good book as we're all self-quarantining. And I got one. It's you can see the cover of it here over my left arm here a little bit is what it looks like. I've got the actual volume on the way. This title will jump out at you. And, of course, it's by Todd Blodgett. That's why he's on the podcast today. The name of this book is Republican Crackhead, An Addict's Life in the FBI and D.C. Hoods While Infiltrating Haters. Todd, welcome back to a podcast by George.
Thank you, George. Glad to be here.
You know, people probably should know, on the political spectrum, you're going to be right of me. But I will say this, you're, an older fellow like me. You're kind of in the mold of a Reagan Republican. I got news for folks. Somebody like you, you're not an ultra right-winger. You're not an ultra conservative in a lot of respects because of the way the political spectrum has shifted in the United States. Todd, I kind of look at you as a moderate to conservative Democrat. Did you think I would start the interview by calling you a Democrat?
Well, no, but it's interesting. Years ago, I was good friends with a guy named Paul Fay, and he was JFK's crewmate on PT-109 and later as Secretary of the Navy. And Paul Fay told me back in the late 1990s in D.C. that Kennedy would have a hard time being nominated in the Democratic Party of the 1990s. So in that sense, there's plenty of Democrats I'm good friends with, and we do agree on a lot of things.
Well, this book, if the title just doesn't jump out at you, folks, this is not for the faint of heart. This book is something else, and this is the way that Todd describes it. And I kind of want to get going on this thing and approach it this way, Todd. You describe it, Republican Crackhead, is essentially 3 stories in one. First of all, your life as a full-time paid FBI informant infiltrating white supremacists, a drug addict in a crime-infested major urban area and all that went with it, and all of that while being a lifelong conservative Republican in Washington, D.C., whose father served for President Bush's administration. Well, I want you to kind of take us up into the first phase here, and bearing in mind we're limited, this is a life we're talking about, so we've got to be somewhat brief. But in this first phase, I want you to take it up to the point, basically, where you're working for the re-election campaign of Roger Jepsen, because your life and my life are going to intersect at that point, and I want you to stop there. So take us up to that juncture.
Yeah, Roger Jepsen was a former 2-term lieutenant governor under Bob Ray, and he was a family friend, and I helped him as a high school student in 1978 in his upset campaign against Senator Clark. He won. So when I graduated from Drake in '83, the senator had taken me to lunch at the Des Moines Club in Des Moines, and this is in February of that year, and said, I'd like you to work for me. So as soon as I graduated, I worked for Jepsen's re-election. He was defeated by Tom Harkin. Another old family friend was Ronald Reagan's older brother, and who I'd known at that point since 1972. So when Jepsen got beat by Harkin, I called Neil Reagan in California, and he said, I'll line up work for you. And that's how I got to D.C. and worked for Reagan in the White House.
All right, so let's stop right there and talk about that failed re-election bid. This is where we come together, and you're not aware of this, I don't think, but it's a big part in my life. I was at WHO Radio doing the news at that time. Now, I was the crime reporter, so to speak, so I didn't have a big role in this story, but I was knowledgeable about it. Jepsen and Harkin were running very close, as I recall. And then here comes this report. Jepsen was one of these family values guys back in the day. I don't even know what they called him, but somebody dug up some information that in 1977 he'd been a member of a massage club or one of those types of And if people will remember, it basically back then it was weird how we go through these stages in America, but for whatever reason these things were legal. They were everywhere. It was kind of like open prostitution, really.
Right.
And they came up with the fact that he'd been involved in that. And that kind of sunk his battleship. And again, I wasn't on that story. I was knowledgeable about it. It was ironic because almost every major story at WHO at that time I had my hands on, but this story came in a different way, and it wasn't mine. I do recall that after that initial report, there was some follow-up stuff, and there was there was some problem with some of that. And again, they kind of kept it away from me. I wasn't real aware of it. But I just wanted to let you know that, Todd, that and I know that you were aware of that back then, but
Oh yeah,
I was in the midst of that.
That happened. The report surfaced in June of 1978. June of 1984. And you're correct. Jepsen, as a former lieutenant governor, had joined this thing. He actually paid with an American Express card. Johnny Carson on his Tonight Show later said, he said, well, Senator Jepsen's not well known, but this is the guy who should have left home without it. So basically, that's what Johnny Carson said on the Tonight Show. So our polls, we have been leading by about 8 points consistently in our polls. We went down to the point we were down by 6 points, and it got worse from there. That was a major factor in that. To give real credit to Senator Clark, we later found out that Dick Clark, as the incumbent senator, learned of this in 1978 after Jepsen won the primary against Maurice Van Nostrand to run against Clark, and Clark did not use it. Tom Harkin, and again, he's just a very good politician, the best I've ever seen on the Democratic side in Iowa, better than Bill Sack, better than Culver, better than anybody. His attitude was, this is fair game. It's a fair thing. It made Jepsen look like a hypocrite, but in fairness to Jepsen, he and his wife did become very religious, and sincerely so. In around the time he ran for the Senate, because I've been with them at their house, they pray before dinner and stuff. He really did have a sincere conversion, but that made him look like a hypocrite because of the fact that he had joined this club back in the day.
He did say that. You're absolutely right. I recall that. I mean, he did say that, but the horse was kind of out of the barn at that point, and it just went south for him from that point forward. The one thing I will say, this continues to come up all the time. I mean, this is if you're going to run as a family values candidate, if you're going to be squeaky clean and espouse those things, if you've got something like that in your history, you might want to get out in front of it, because if they dig it up and you have to have it come at you from behind, even to the present day, like it did Roger Jepsen, that's a problem. It's like, if you're going to campaign on the fact that you're a farmer and you want people to elect you because you're a farmer, well, don't, be a hobby farmer that cheated on the set-aside program and not get out in front of that some way, because that'll come back to haunt you. I mean, I get that. All right, so let's move ahead here. And I mean, honest to God, the great thing about this book, Todd, and you kind of intimated a little bit in your forward or whatever, this is all true. I'm reading this stuff and it's like, my God, it has to be true, because nobody could make it up. So fast forward here, take us ahead a little bit. Ronald Reagan, you work for him. You become an informant for the FBI. Tell us all about this.
Well, what happened was I worked for Reagan in the White House, and then from there, Lee Atwater, who was kind of the premier strategist at the time in the late 80s, asked me to go to the Bush campaign. This is before Dan Quayle joined the ticket. So I'm on the campaign staff, and about 2 months before Quayle's on the ticket, Atwater takes me to dinner in D.C., and he asked me to go to what he called the Opposition Research Department. And he said, we're going to do a lot of things. He said, have you ever heard of Willie Horton? I said, yeah, he played for the Detroit Tigers, I think. He said, no, not that one. So this is the guy that's going to help me elect Vice President Bush as the 41st president. I worked for the Bush campaign, and then I was at the RNC when Atwater was chairman. He got brain cancer and died about a year later. And so the RNC was never the same. And I was bummed out about politics. I wasn't really a Bush Republican at that point. So I started an advertising agency and got several good clients. And I was introduced at the National Press Club to a guy named Willis Carto. The man who introduced me was Franklin D. Roosevelt's son-in-law, who then was about 85 years old, and his name was Curtis Dahl. And here's the son-in-law of the greatest Democratic president introducing me to Willis Carto. So you think to yourself, okay, he can't be all that bad. Carto, I mean. Carto kind of presented himself as a kind of a Pat Buchanan-esque kind of guy. He had a corporation called Liberty Lobby. He had a media empire. He owned a radio network called Sun Radio. He had a weekly newspaper that had 300,000 copies mailed out of D.C. This is in the late 80s, called The Spotlight. He asked me if I would do his advertising for him. I didn't really want to do it, so I named a price I never thought he'd meet. I said, I'll tell you what, you pay me a flat fee of $3,500 a month consulting fee, pay the rent on my office in downtown, take over paying my secretary, and give me a full-time assistant at Liberty Lobby and 20% on all the ads I sell, and I'll do it. He called the next day from his office in California and said, I'm going to hire you. So I was kind of stuck. within a few months, I was making, $30,000, $40,000 a month just on the advertising. I was very greedy. I was very opportunistic. I was very insensitive. I did not find out until about a year in what he was all about. There were people coming in that office like David Duke and David Irving, and people that I knew about Duke, of course, not the other ones. These were professional Holocaust deniers. These are people who knew very well that the Holocaust took place, but they put out the propaganda, especially the college kids, to turn them against Jewish people. So at that point, I walked into Willis's office. This is in like the summer of '96, after about a year there. And I said, look, I can't deal with this kind of stuff. I have Jewish friends. I'm not into this kind of stuff. He said, okay, I'm going to call Mark Lane, who was the famous attorney, Mark Lane. Who was
I remember him from the JFK stuff, sure.
Right, and it was also Jane Fonda's legal counsel. He was in Guyana, Jonestown, when the thing happened, and he survived it when they all drank the Kool-Aid. He was Jim Jones's lawyer. Anyway, Lane basically, to use the term strong arm is mild. He simply said, listen, we know you're not on board with this stuff, but he knew I was good at what I did. He said, you're going to make $500,000 this year. I said, yeah. He said, so what's your problem? I said, I can't do it. He goes, tell you what, if you don't stick with us and break your contract early, the Des Moines Register and all the media in Iowa are going to find out that the son of the deputy majority leader in the Iowa House of Representatives is raising big bucks for the nation's premier Holocaust denier. That's what Mark Lane told me. Mark Lane then told how he survived the Jonestown attack, where Congressman Leo Ryan was actually gunned down in the helicopter, in the airplane. And at that point, I had to really think about it. So I went home, I talked to my wife, who was from Iowa, my then wife, and she just said, look, keep your head down and just don't make trouble for them. They're going to make trouble for your dad politically and everything else. So I just basically hunkered down and did my job. I was well paid for it, but it was blood money. And then basically what happened was about 2.5 years later, Willis owed me a bunch of money. He had the same week he would not pay me my $87,000 he owed me for just 2 months of commissions. He was found guilty in a California court of embezzling $7.5 million from an estate left to Liberty Lobby by the niece of Thomas Edison, who was a Holocaust denier. And he used it for his own purposes. So he put Liberty Lobby in bankruptcy, owed me money, and was trying to stiff me. So I took the lawyer on him, and instead of paying me the $87,000, he gave me shares in the world's most profitable, largest, best-known racist record corporation called Resistance Records. There was no YouTube back then. Even DVDs were just coming out. And so people would buy these things. And I thought, I don't want this crap.
It's bigger. I recall, I mean, I've heard of that. I mean, this thing was bigger and more profitable than a lot of people would probably concern. For one thing, it's a niche, it's a small market, but it was their market.
It was their market. They had people that would come in from all over the country and the world who would sleep wherever they could find a spare couch and work 12 hours a day for the so-called cause of Holocaust denial. And they would basically work for 3 meals a day at McDonald's. And so they had no labor costs.
Okay, so now how did you get from that world into the world of the FBI?
Well, what happened was I got a call from William Pierce, who was Cardo's arch rival in the world of white supremacy. He was an anti-Semite, a real bigot. He wrote the Turner Diaries that inspired the Oklahoma City bombing. Yes. I never even met Pierce or talked to him. He called me on my cell phone, and he had looked up the records and saw that the controlling shares of the company were mine. I had 34% of the company, but my shares were Class A shares. They were not Class B. They were the controlling shares. And on the phone, he offered me $250,000 for my shares. Now, remember, I got that in lieu of $87,000. So I basically said sold. So he drove to my office about a week later in downtown D.C., Cleveland Park, brought in a briefcase with 2,500 $100 bills, as he called them Benjamins. We counted every one of them. I signed the deal, and at that point, I said to him, listen, I'll be happy to buy you lunch. I figured he just gave me $250,000. I can spring for lunch. He said, I'd like to eat lunch at the University Club. I didn't even tell him I was a member, but he looked me up somewhere. I think it was in Who's Who in America or something, but he knew I was a member there. And I was in jeans and boots and a flannel shirt. I'm not a fancy guy. I said, well, we have to have a coat and tie there. He said, well, I see you've got a blue blazer and a tie, so when you go there, you're ready. Let's go. They'll have a coat and tie for me, which they did. Little did I know he'd been there before. So we go there, and a reporter calls me the next day from the Washington Post, and he just asked me a simple question. Are you a member of the University Club, and did you take William Pierce yesterday? I said, yes and yes. He said, thank you. Next thing you know, a big article in the Washington Post appears in early January of 2000. Clinton's still president. And there was a big brouhaha at the club. They told me they want me to resign. I said no. They kicked me out. And the FBI got wind of this. And about a week after that, mid-January, there was a knock on my door. It's an FBI agent and an IRS agent, both of whom are with the JTTF, the Joint Terrorism Task Force. They personally asked me to come on board.
Okay, so let me stop you there. And this is what I knew that we would get into with this. We're already starting to get close to running out of time. I mean, and for one thing, I don't want to cover all of this because I want people to read this book because, honest to God, it's unbelievable. Now, I want to hit on a couple of other things very quickly. The fact that you got inside of these hate groups when you're working for the FBI and became a part of that world. Was this, again, like the Stockholm Syndrome they talk about, or how did that happen?
Well, they knew I was already on a first-name basis with all of the leaders of these groups because I had sold ads for Cardo, and I was basically affiliated with William Pierce. So they knew I knew all these people. They literally said to me, look, we've got your bank record. We've seen your phone record. We know you've traveled overseas. We know what you've done. And we know that you know these people. So you're the only guy in the country that could do what we want you to have done. They did not pressure me. I was never under any threat of indictment, although they made it clear if I had not cooperated, the trail would someday probably lead to me. There was some money laundering going on with what we did. And I admitted to that. And they said, you're home free if you join us. So I joined them. They paid me $6,500 a month.
Wow.
As far as Stockholm Syndrome, I've never had any fondness for these people. These are sociopaths. They're evil people. No, not bad.
Yeah. Now, okay, so that's the, and again, you can read more about this FBI informant role. The part about the crackhead thing, now that's right in the title of the book. So, I mean, this is a huge part of your life, right up until the current day. I know that you're recovered, but
Yeah.
did that come about? Was that addiction because of your undercover work? Did that, in other words, no.
No, what happened in the crackhead thing was I was doing a lot of drinking at the time. I wasn't an alcoholic, but I was a very heavy drinker. And I was at the University Club one night in 1998. I was so drunk I couldn't drive home. I called my wife and said, let's get a room upstairs. They have, guest rooms upstairs. Before that happened, though, I went to the library and I stumbled, and a man helped me. He picked me up, and he recognized me. He said, you're Todd Blodgett. I met you at Republican functions. His name was Greg Stevens. Greg Stevens at the time was working for Haley Barbour, the former Mississippi Republican governor, former RNC chairman. And we talked. And so I went to the desk to get a room, but the ABA, the American Bar Association, was in town. All the rooms were taken. I walked across the street to the Jefferson Hotel. They're all taken there. Stevens saw me. He said, don't try to drive. Just take a room in I've got a place down the street. I got 2 guest rooms. You can stay there. Well, I did. This is a white guy, by the way, a white Protestant Republican from San Clemente, California. He's the one that introduced me to crack cocaine. About 3 or 4 years after that, he was found dead in bed with the actress Carrie Fisher of a drug overdose.
Wow. Well, and anybody that doesn't think so, I mean, that's just another little vignette about how the scourge of drug addiction works across all classes, races, individuals, everything from crack cocaine to heroin to methamphetamine. I mean, it touches everyone. And okay, that's another just kind of a yes or no brief question that I wanted to ask you because of your own experiences and what you've seen, your own addiction. How do you feel about decriminalizing drugs?
I don't have a problem with decriminalizing marijuana, but I don't want to see cocaine or anything above that, crystal meth, PCP, heroin. I don't want that criminalized. I've seen so many people destroyed, not by marijuana. I know people that are practicing lawyers that get high every night and do a good job in court the next day. I guess what I'm also trying to emphasize in this book is the stereotype of crack cocaine being a ghetto drug is just not true. I'm not from the ghetto. I knew a lot of white people that were just as addicted, if not more so. And the big money that's made on drugs is not by the 3-block dealers in places like DC and Baltimore. It's made by people who look like you and me. But I oppose decriminalization of anything above the level of marijuana.
Okay, I mean, I get that, and your point of view is invaluable on this. Well, this is it's just an amazing thing. The story is just unbelievable. I'm glad you're telling it, and I'm glad that this book is out there, and the detail is wonderful. And I got to tell you something, when I read some accounts, memoirs, and that type of thing, and they have all of this very specific, explicit detail, I'm a little dubious. I look at this and say, well, God, do you really remember, as you just recounted, what you were wearing on that day, what the weather was like, whether or not there was a bird singing outside the window, or is that just literary license? Well, here's the thing that separates a book writer like you, in my mind, from folks like that, and that is FBI people in the FBI world, maybe even informants and people like yourself, they're trained. A big part of what they do, and we saw this just recently with James Comey and all of this Russiagate baloney that came out of Washington, D.C., they are detailed note takers. They take notes about all of their activities. Well, that's not why they do it, but it ends up being an excellent source or resource for book writing, Todd.
Yeah, and I've always been a note taker. I kept like a diary when I was addicted. I was going through my divorce. I kept detailed notes because I had to for my job. Even when I was wearing a wire, I'd have to say, the man who says this, his name is Ed Fields. His name is Don Black, whatever. So I kept very detailed notes.
I give you and again, it's funny we talked about Mark Lane, a discredited conspiracy theorist with the Kennedy assassination and a blight, as you described him, obviously. But it reminds me of James Hosty, who I'm sure you're familiar with, the lead FBI investigator in Dallas after Kennedy was shot. If there was any conspiracy, my opinion, involved in that particularly that had the FBI in on it, Hosty did it. And what he did was, he got rid of his notes. That was the first thing that occurred to him because he had talked to Oswald. He knew of him. I think they knew where he worked, in a perfect sniper's position to shoot Kennedy. And after Kennedy got shot, Hosty flushed those notes down the toilet, folks. I mean, that's what he did. And again, all of these FBI guys, they live and die by those notes, and that's a fundamental of this book. It's just great stuff. Well, Todd, we got to get out of here. I want to promote the book. I'm going to put up graphics to show the title, Republican Crackhead, An Addict's Life in the FBI and D.C. Hoods While Infiltrating Haters. Going to give you the last word, pal. What do you want to say to folks here about the book, about your life, what you're doing now? Anything you want to say here in closing?
I just say I deeply regret my involvement with the far right, the racist right. It's not the same as, respectable conservatism. It's wrong to hate people for their faith, their race, their sexual preference, whatever, their gender. And as far as drug addiction, there's a lot of similarities between the kind of people who get into drug addiction and into racist politics. A lot of times they're not happy with their life. They're upset about something. They might be unemployed, or they might just have too much money and too much time on their hands, as I did. But there is hope to get out of addiction, just like there's hope to get out of this nasty kind of hate, organized hatred. Stay away from that crap. And if you need help getting out of it, let me know and I'll help you with either one.
That's great. That's a great stopping point. We'll stop this interview here, but we'll come back. Todd Blodgett. I mean, he's an excellent commentator and an analyst on current political affairs. He's got a breadth of history based on his own political experience, obviously, and my God, this professional career that absolutely is shocking. Look for, and you'll see it scream off the book cover, Republican Crackhead. That's great stuff. Todd, thanks for being on.
Thanks, George. Good to be with you.
That's going to do it. That's all there is, and there ain't no more for today, folks. That's another podcast by George.